Okay? So, something I want us to look at, we've got, of course, questions I hope to get to, but there's something that I wanted to be sure that I'm explaining well, so my apologies, even though I'm not ashamed to have you to do these questions because it's for your own good. However, in preparing these questions and answers, something else came to my attention that I definitely want us to discuss in lesson number 5 here in person. So, I wanted you to note that in Acts chapter 2, and this has been said recently, so we're basically looking at things that, seeds that have been planted and watering them, wanting them to grow. I want you to be reminded there in Acts chapter 2 that Peter says, this is what was uttered by the prophet Joel, that whole scene on the day of Pentecost. In the last days it shall be, God declares, that I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. So Joel was speaking in what we call chapter 2 of Joel about what happened in Acts chapter 2. In Acts chapter 3, he's talking about those days still. And he says, all the prophets who have spoken from Samuel and those who came after him also proclaimed these days. I want you to understand that Joel spoke of those days, and it wasn't just those first couple of days, or just the day of Pentecost, the beginning of the church and the church era, as we call it, or the kingdom era. Notice that even in the book of Hebrews, when you've got some Hebrews that were converted, and they were slipping back, and they needed a letter to help them progress. So this book of Hebrews was much later than the day that Acts chapter 2 happened. And you still have this phrase, as you know, verse 1, God, who at various times and in various ways spoke through the prophets. But in these last days has spoken to us by a Son. These last days, again, so many times when we read in the New Testament, it says last days. And when we use the word last, it doesn't seem like there's much time after last. Like today is the last class of the book of the 12. And you're thinking, in less than 60 minutes, we're going to be talking about something else. This is the last class. However, I want you to notice that this phrase in the New Testament, last days, have been happening for almost 2,000 years. This is an era. It's an era of time, okay? So, notice, again, he says all the prophets. So, when we're looking at the book of the 12, we should always be looking at what they had to say about this era. You have a question?
Can you go back?
The slide?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always thought that Hebrews, first chapter of Hebrews, when it says these last days, was when Jesus was on earth, where he actually spoke. And so it would have been before the days that Joel spoke about when people were uttered. In other words, in these last days, he has spoken to us by, it says, see, in the old days they spoke by the prophets, but in these days they spoke to us by the Son. And there's all the things that Jesus said in all the Gospels that I thought he was talking about, but maybe not.
Yeah, that's interesting because we know that there was interaction with Paul after the ascension of Acts chapter 1. And Paul says in chapter 14 of 1 Corinthians that the things that I write are the commandments of the Lord. And I do think he's talking about Jesus. So it's an interesting thing when we're looking at it. It's a different structure. I think it comes down to the Lord Jesus' role when he goes to the right hand of the Father. As I mentioned in one of my sermons on Sunday, the Father is still very, very busy with the nations, making every enemy the Lord's footstool. Jesus is very busy with all things to the church. And so when any apostle, I don't think that we could, maybe I'm reading it wrong. I'm glad you brought it up because I never thought about that angle. But like in Matthew 28, 18 through 20, go in all the world, preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized. Well, I'm mixing Mark 16, but you get my point. And then he says, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. I don't think that they have a codified list to make sure they get through this stuff. I think as time went on, he was going to help them each step of the way. But Jesus gets the credit because he is in charge of that. All things to the church from the time he ascends to the right hand of the Father. And that's the way I read it. But yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Well, I just had heard it said that particular phrase, of course, the first two is fine, but it normally in the original text would have said through his son, rather by, instead of by his son. You know, anyways,
yeah,
I just thought
and what we have a fail safe in that they're unified.
exactly.
And so, you know, if any
I go along with both.
one verse here or there, or just like the resurrection, you can find evidence of Jesus was raised from the dead by the Father. You can find evidence, word for word, that the Spirit, he was raised through the Spirit. And then you can find evidence where Jesus says, I lay down my life, I have the power to take it up. So they're working together, and they have a delegation of authority to focus.
Sure, I understand. And they're all in unison, so that works.
Right, yeah, so, right, anyway. But I'm glad you brought that because I never really put that thought in that angle. But nevertheless.
Doesn't, in the older versions like King James, which I don't have, it say sundry times?
Sundry, probably.
Yeah, it does. That's
And?
how I learned it when I was younger. It's
Okay.
Sundry times,
And,
which I'm trying to find out what that means. I haven't found it yet. I'm looking.
Sundry means before then, or before this. I think I looked that up.
Well, this says at various different periods or ages in history, not all at once.
History, right?
That's what it's saying sundry times means.
It's not present and it's not future. It would have to be past.
yeah, sundry, that's Hebrews 1. God who at sundry times.
Yeah.
It's just an old-timey way of saying past time.
Various times,
Okay,
because it said, and I'm getting.
from time to time, sundry.
Various times and ages.
Mhm. You're
I
saying,
learned it that way when I was in my youth. I learned,
okay,
you know, when you read something so much, before, I'm sorry, shut up. Before ESV came along, I learned sundry time, you know?
okay, that's great.
You're acting like you have never heard that.
No, I'm just wondering if there's more there that I'm missing. You're
I
just
don't
pointing
know,
out
I
how
just-
fun that word is, or?
I'm just wondering what's the difference in sundry times and last days.
Okay, so if the King James, of course, was written back in 1490.
Right.
So back then, that's what that word meant, and then we stopped using it. In those of us who speak English, and everybody with Connie stopped using it. So anyway, that's an old-timey way to say it, as languages always evolve when you use them. Especially with youth, they like to think of a new word so that they're not sounding like their old man, stuff like
Well,
that.
the reason I brought it up is because you're talking about what the last days mean,
Yes.
and I'm wondering if, you know, the old King James had something to say about, you know, the difference in that.
I don't think so. As far as Hebrews chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, it just means there was a time before the moment when Jesus went to the right hand and is in charge of all things. So before then, he could use an angel to give the law. He could use a prophet to give the law, all kinds of stuff. So, but now it's a focus, and there's an intent focus, meaning you can make an argument that, as we just did a moment ago, wait a minute, the apostles are given those laws where the rubber meets the road. It's not Jesus, technically, but the point of verse 2 is that Jesus is taking charge of every word that is given to us. Every command, every piece of wisdom in the new covenant is all, does not get into the prophet's mouth or onto the page without Jesus' approval. That's basically us being reminded that he's in charge of the new covenant, regardless. That's all that's about. That there's a split time. There's a time marker, and that is when Jesus goes to the right hand of the Father. And so before then, it's different than from the time Jesus takes over. That's all that's trying to say in Hebrews. As far as I read it. Okay. Now, these last days, what I want to emphasize to you. So, when we're reading and understanding the 12 prophets, it would behoove us to be looking for, in every one of the passages of those 12 prophets, are they talking about the church age? As you're reading it slow, because it bounces, guys. The all prophecy, but we're talking about the 12. It'll go for 4 verses talking about the there and then pop up to the Messiah and his mission on earth, and then pop up to the church age, which as we know now is over 2,000 years, or almost 2,000 years. So anyway, you have to be careful not to miss it. Don't miss what they're trying to say, because some of it has 2 interpretations. What I mean is 2 fulfillments.
And they all were before Jesus' time, and he makes it very clear that some of these Old Testament passages weren't laid out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on purpose.
Right, and it was on purpose. That's right. That's right. Okay. So the 12 prophets wrote about the church age. Make no mistake about it. Peter is saying that, and it is true. When you read it, you'll see that the church age is coming up. That's very important. What I'm getting ready to show you. So, Joel 2. Remember Peter, and on the day of Pentecost, says this is what the prophet Joel said. That's the day of Pentecost. Now, we, modern people, made that chapter 2, and what's following we call chapter 3, but Joel didn't write 2, 3. It was a thought process, a stream of prophecy. So when you read chapter 2 and 3 and remind yourself that Joel didn't bust it up, you can really see Joel 3 being connected with the beginning of the church age and it continuing. All right, so what we call chapter 3 says, "For behold, in those days," what days? The days of the church era. "And at that time, when I restore the fortunes of Judah and Jerusalem." Now, what are the fortunes? Well, I believe when you read that, he's talking about the people. Remember earlier in our study of the prophets that God took Israel and they were sowing to the wind, so they reaped the whirlwind. He takes them and sows them like seed so as to harvest the church. It's one way of putting it. Israel was let go like you would seed in a field so that true Israelites would come up and they would be the church. So the people are the harvest. You might have heard and remember in the New Covenant the word first fruits. First fruits are the early church fruits, meaning they're likening that to a harvest. You've heard Jesus say that the laborers are few. Pray the Lord send, forgive me, something to the harvest, any reapers to the harvest. Nevertheless, there's all kinds of farm symbolism in the way they talk. And here, the fortunes, it's talking about the people. Instead of farming, it's talking about as though they were treasure, which we are. Just ask Peter, and he'll tell you that we are his special treasure. Okay. But starts out with talking about that. All right, so after the church begins, something else is beginning. Verse 2, Joel 3, verse 2. I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. And I will enter into judgment with them there on behalf of my people and my heritage Israel, because they have scattered them among the nations and have divided up my land. So, the story of Israel is they got carried off into captivity by Assyria, and that's Israel north. Judah is carried off by Babylon, the Chaldeans. But all the nations were very, we'll just say, use the word rude. They were rude to the Israelite and to the survivors, because when you say they got taken into captivity, that's the majority of them. But there were some that would run off into the woods and then come back, and then the surrounding nations would pick them off and make them slaves and steal what they had, because there were so few of them there. They didn't have a clan to protect them. So God is bringing into judgment the nations that are surrounding Israel. Okay? This is a key phrase here, the valley of Jehoshaphat. All right? Why is it called the valley of Jehoshaphat? I believe that it's not hard to see. That line is hard to see. But it's not hard to see when you know the story of Jehoshaphat. Does anybody remember when Jehoshaphat was going to war? Other than you and I, we just talked about it. Anybody remember what the war strategy was? Okay, it's all right. You can't remember it all.
Run away.
Take a guess. Come on, what?
Is that where they came in for one angle, small group, they came in from the back, or no?
No, that's a different one. Well, they might have done. Joshua, I think he has a couple fights. But this one is famous because,
Didn't he come and attack and then he started running away? And he...
well, I think that's what you're talking about. Yeah, I think he did, but that's a different story. So I'm not being fair. There's more than one. The one I'm talking about is he gets the choir together and they sing. That's the war strategy. The three armies are coming, and he gets the choirs together and they sing, and God causes confusion with the three armies. And the two armies, which, if I'm not misquoting it, Moab and the Ammonites, they fight the people of the mountain of Seir, which I think are the Edomites, but nevertheless, there's three armies. These two start attacking the third enemy of Israel. And then they wipe these out. Now there's just two, and guess what happens next? They fight each other, right? And wipe each other out. God says that gorgeous phrase, stand still.
See the salvation of the Lord.
It's because he says that at the Red Sea. Yeah, Red Sea. I always get red and dead mixed up. Nevertheless, it is the Red Sea. Remember when Moses said, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Well, God says it again here with Jehoshaphat, and there's a big confusion. The reason why it's important here in Joel 3 is it's a nickname for it so that you're reminded of what he did in the valley with Jehoshaphat. All right. Verse 3. Again, we're in Joel 3. I have cast lots for my people. I have traded a boy for, and they have, the nations around. They took the straggler children and sold them. That's what it's saying. That they have cast lots for my people and have traded a boy for a prostitute and have sold a girl for wine and have drunk it. What are you to me, O Tyre and Sidon and all the regions of Philistia? Are you paying me back for something? If you're paying me back, I will return your payment on your own head swiftly and speedily. For you have taken my silver and my gold, and have carried my rich treasures into your temples. You have sold the people of Judah and Jerusalem to the Greeks, in order to remove them far from their own border. Behold, I will stir them up from the place to which you have sold them, and I will return your payment on your own head. I will sell your sons and your daughters into the hand of the people of Judah, and they will sell them to the Sabians, to a nation far away, for the Lord has spoken. All right, so real quick, the Sabians, just in case that's capturing your attention, that's a very powerful group of people that were all the way down in the bottom of the Saudi Arabian peninsula, right now where Yemen is. That's kind of beside the point. Nevertheless, that's who the Sabians are. It's just an example. I'm going to sell your people. You sold my people, now it's coming back on you. You're going to reap what you sow. You have been very bad and irreverent to me and to my people. Now you're going to pay. That's what Joel is saying to the nations that have taken advantage of an opportunity and not cared about the holiness of God and God's people. So he's telling them. Verse 9, proclaim this among the nations. Consecrate for war. Stir up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. We just talked about that phrase, did we not? Yet, you remember it was opposite, right? When he talks to us, he says, no more war. But to the nations, he's telling them, you're going to be at war. He's going to make them go to war. He's telling those nations, Tyre, Sidon, Edomites, Ammonites, Moabites, all of the Canaanites that are still there that should have been gone hundreds and hundreds of years ago. He says, let the weak say, I am a warrior. He's saying everybody, every nation should be involved. Hasten and come, all you surrounding nations. Gather yourselves there. Bring down your warriors, O Lord. Let the nations stir themselves up and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat. There's that phrase again. For there I will sit to judge all the surrounding nations. So he makes reference to the valley of Jehoshaphat, and he tells all the nations to get ready for war. So mix the understanding of the valley of Jehoshaphat with him telling all those nations to go to war. What's he going to do to them?
Make them fight each other?
He's going to make them fight each other. What I'm driving at, I'm going to go ahead and say. That's still happening today. There is no peace in the Middle East. There's not going to be sustained peace in the Middle East. Why? Because God has taken the grace away from those nations. Hear me now. Individuals can have peace. Individuals, even in those nations, can come to the Lord. That's the whole idea. That's the whole design. But the nations themselves are going to be at war. And if, as I like to say, even if nobody picks on the Jews for a little while, then there'll be some guy with a funny mustache that'll do it for a little bit. You ever wonder why there's no peace in the Middle East? I think Joel 3 and Zechariah 14 tell us why. This is what people think is Armageddon. When they think of Armageddon, sometimes they might be thinking of war like the Battle of Gettysburg. That lasted 3 days. And it's over, and we talk about it, and we count the dead. Okay, 3 days. Some wars last for 3 months. But even though we don't want to go through 3 months of war, once that's over, you're through it, you think, okay, what happened? What's different now? That kind of. This is going on for 2,000 years, in my opinion. I think that the battle that we're reading about, the judgment of those nations, is that they will never and they still aren't to this day. They're chaotic. Iran, Iraq, Syria, all that. Every time you turn around, somebody's picking a fight with somebody over there. Always. Iran won't quit. Iran right now won't quit. They just announced they're going to war with the world.
And now that they're starting their nuclear program up again.
Yes. They're not even going to try and hide it this time. They're just going to say, hey, we're doing it. Why? Why? Because God said that all the surrounding nations who were just an absolute abomination to his people in their time of vulnerability, as a result of that, those nations will never have peace. They just won't. The individuals can. I want to say that again. If you're an individual living over there at any one of those nations, you can seek the Lord and find the Lord. But the nations, like right now, we know about America. We know, if we're smart, we know our history. We know about the founding fathers, and we know about, each one of our states, and roughly when we had 13, and then we got more of them, and then we expanded, and one day we bought Alaska, and we bought Hawaii. Who knows? We might buy it before this class is up. We'll see what. Anyway, point is, we know the history of this country, and we've seen something that happened that didn't happen in the rest of human history, and it's pretty impressive. We don't know how long it's going to last, but we know about our history, and we know the country, and we know about the American. America and the American. It's two different things. The same is true that they are nations over there. We are seeing something pretty spectacular. Our nation is not in that mess that we're reading about.
They're so stuck in time as far as fighting over the land that God took from them.
Yeah.
I mean, it's still about the land,
Yeah.
which they can't get past that.
For whatever reason, and this is the reason, I think. Joel 3 and Zechariah 11, 12, 13, and 14.
Interesting.
God said, this is your future until the end. Your future is unrest. That's your future, your nation's future. You can leave your nation, and you can be, what's going on is the whole time the Father is handling all of this unrest, making the Lord's enemies his footstool, the whole time, Jesus is taking people for his kingdom out of those nations. Same as he is here in America. Obviously, not all Americans are true followers of Christ, right? Same is true even in those really difficult places to live. Jesus can take you out of those nations, and you can be in the kingdom of God no matter where you are in this world. So, verse 13, that's what, put in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Go in, tread, for the winepress is full, the vats overflow, for their evil is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision. The valley of decision. Why is that phrase there? You have a choice. You can be loyal to your nation and think that Babylon is great, or you can be loyal to the Lord. It's your choice. You can either be broken on that stone, or you can be ground into powder. It's your choice. This is the valley of decision. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars withdraw their shinings. What does that phrase always mean?
Change of power.
Change in power. Exactly. I'm in control of the power of these nations, and they're never going to rise again. They're always going to have civil unrest. Always. The Lord roars from Zion and utters his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth quake. But the Lord is a refuge to his people throughout all this war, and a stronghold to The people of Israel, not the nation. Which we can see with plenty of references, as I've said in recent times. The real Jew is the one with a circumcised heart. The real Jew is the one not on the outward, but on the inward. The real Jew are those who are baptized into Christ. That's the Jew now. That started with the church. So you shall know that I am the Lord your God, who dwells in Zion, my holy mountain, and Jerusalem. Now this is heavenly Jerusalem. The references to Zion, the mountain, all of that. Hebrews chapter 12, we have come to the mountain, heavenly Jerusalem. All right. And in that day the mountain shall drip sweet wine, and the hills shall flow with milk, and the stream beds of Judah shall flow with water, and the fountain shall come forth from the house of the Lord. From the house of the Lord. Again, in spiritual house of the Lord. Just like Revelation chapter 21 and 22. Egypt shall become a desolation. Edom, a desolate wilderness, and for the violence done to the people of Judah, because they have shed innocent blood in their land. But Judah shall be inhabited forever, and Jerusalem to all generations. That's talking about, in my opinion, as I'm reading this, it's got to be talking about heavenly Jerusalem. Has to be. The last verse of Joel 3, I will avenge their blood. Blood I have not avenged. Now, if you read that fast, you'll miss it. I will avenge their blood. Whose blood?
People that he's not yet avenged.
Exactly. Now, that reminds me of Revelation 6. They cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. Now we get to Zechariah 11. Oh my goodness, the time. Zechariah 11 is just brutal on Israel. It talks about two staffs. First of all, in chapter 11, it talks about how the shepherd was terrible, and now he's going to be the tough shepherd. You know, like good cop, bad cop. Now he's the shepherd, and he's going to take and basically judge them. He's going to have these two staffs, one called beauty and one called bonds. He's going to cut the beauty in two and bonds in two. He's saying that they represent, one represents the Israel and how they, what does it say? Let's go to that. Zechariah. I believe it's either 11 or 12. We'll find it real quick. Zechariah 11. Somebody help me find that. Find where it says two staffs. I think it's chapter 12. Nope, it's 11.
Verse 7.
What's that?
Verse 7.
Of 11?
11:7, yes, sir.
And I will feed the flock of slaughter, even you, O poor of the flock. And I took unto me two staves. I'm in the King James. Whoo, I can't read that.
Two staffs.
Took on
One
to
I
me.
call favor, and the other I call union.
Beauty or bonds, favor or bonds, yeah. And then in verse 10, I took my staff beauty and cut it in two, that I might break the covenant which I had made with all the people. So he's breaking his covenant. That's what the one staff busted in two means. So Israel has no covenant anymore. And then, in verse, where's the second one at?
14.
14?
Yep.
Then I cut my other staff bonds that I might break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. So basically what he's saying, I mean blatantly what he's saying, is similar to sowing like seed Israel to reap the church. Now he's saying, we are no longer family. For 200 years, you were completely unfaithful to me, and you are not my people. Remember the whole thing with not my people, no more pity? The same thing here. You are not related to Judah anymore. You're gone. Now it's spiritual Israel. So that's what's going on in Zechariah chapter 11 and 12. There's a divine shepherd of God's people. We see he's pierced. Of course, that points to the cross. Chapter 13, we have the prediction that God's hand would be in it all, that God was in control of the whole situation, that God used the evil designs of men to accomplish his own divine will. Now in chapter 14, the final chapter, God will once again use these wicked nations to prove to his people and strengthen them. Not prove to his people, to prove his people, to refine his people. All right, so let's look at the first 4 verses of Zechariah. Behold, a day is coming for the Lord when the spoil taken from you will be divided in your midst. For I will gather all the nations against Jerusalem to battle. Same language as Joel 3. And the city shall be taken, and the houses plundered, and the women raped. Half of the city shall go out into exile, but the rest of the people shall be cut off from the city. This is amazing. He,
Shall not be cut.
God, will gather them.
Shall not be cut.
Shall not be cut.
I'm sorry?
Shall not be cut off.
Right. The good people will not be cut off. Thank you for catching that. Right. All right. God is going to gather the nations against earthly Jerusalem. I want you to notice in this, really interesting to me, and it's not, prophecy is never to be taken as a exact science. However, it says half the city shall go out into exile. The Lord will go out and fight against those nations as when the fights on a day of battle. On that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem on the east. In Ezekiel chapter 10 and 11, the glory of the Lord leaves the temple and he stands on the Mount of Olives, which is right outside of the temple. He gets out of the temple because he's bringing Nebuchadnezzar down to destroy it. He gets out of the way. I believe that this is the Father standing on the Mount of Olives, Zechariah 14, for the battle. He's got work to do against the enemies of Jerusalem. So he comes out of the temple, Ezekiel 10 and 11. He stands on the Mount of Olives. Zechariah also says it. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from the east to the west by the valley, by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall move northward and the other half southward. So, as I said, the glory of the Lord was with Moses. The glory of the Lord was there in the temple when Solomon built it. In Ezekiel 10, the glory of the Lord departed. In Ezekiel 11, he stood on the mount that is east of the city. That's the Mount of Olives. Some people think that that's Jesus standing on the mountain of Jerusalem. It's not. This is to the east of the city, the Mount of Olives. This is God standing up there causing the battle. What some people would call Armageddon on the Mount of Olives. I want you to see this, by the way. Half of the city, if you look at a bird's eye map, by the way, that's the Mount of Olives, and that is the city over there on the left-hand side. Here's a blow-up of the city. Right now, we refer to it as having 4 quarters. Jerusalem has 4 quarters. But really, it's either Muslim or it's not. This is Muslim control. The Muslims control that much of Jerusalem to this day. To me, that feels like half. Is it exactly half? No, that's not the point. It's prophetic. I do not in any way associate myself with the Crusaders. I think it's fascinating, but I don't think you go and kill people with the sword to take over that city. We're for heavenly Jerusalem. But for centuries, back and forth with the Muslims, back and forth with the Muslims. The Knights Templar, by the way, they have about as much success as you can have. They're in the city of Jerusalem. They see the Dome of the Rock, and they assume it's Solomon's temple. Now that makes 0 sense, because we know Solomon's temple was torn down completely. However, they had the opportunity. Like I say many times, that Dome of the Rock sits where the temple used to sit. It's an embarrassment to like the Catholic Church and whatnot. It's an embarrassment certainly to the Jews. They had it in their possession, but it didn't get knocked down. That's the providence of God because of the battle. If that wasn't there, Muslims would not own half of Jerusalem to this day. Yet, the prophecy in Zechariah says they gave up half the city. I think the Battle of Armageddon has been happening ever since Jesus went to the right hand of the Father, and the Father said, "Sit at my right hand till I make all of your enemies your footstool." And they've been fighting ever since.
Isn't that whole thing talking about heavenly Jerusalem when he's talking about a unique day and
Yes,
how the light and
Yes.
it's going to be the same as before creation?
Yes. Yes, it is. And that's what we have to do. Again, when we're reading that, when it says those things about Jerusalem and it doesn't use the word heavenly Jerusalem, well, what are the facts? What are the details? What is in the text? It can't be earthly because that's not going on. And it's not going to go on because we know Jesus, according to, is it 1 Thessalonians 4? Yeah. Where when he comes back, we meet him in the air. He's not coming to Jerusalem, earthly Jerusalem. We meet him in the air. The one standing on the mountain, according to Zechariah and Ezekiel, is the Father orchestrating the battle.
Well, that word unique is translated one, and we talk about the one eternal day.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, right. Revelation 21. Yeah. No
Where the
longer
Lord
need
is
for a
the
son.
Lord, and his name is one. And
Yes. Yes. All of that is there. It all lines up and helps us understand the book of Revelation. Anyway, I wanted you to see that in Zechariah, the last 4 chapters of Zechariah and the last chapter of Joel talks about how God is in control of the nations and he's trying to get them to come to their senses. He's trying to get them to understand there's no peace on earth. There's no peace trusting in your government. There's no peace unless you come to the kingdom of God. This is the valley of decision. Choose. And choose right. Choose Jesus. Yes.
And right in the beginning, when you said about restoring the first thing you showed, the first slide you showed, in order to restore, there has to have been something before. And the only thing that God's people had were the people itself. See, in the last days, the first one, it was actually the one before that.
Well,
I think you had an early one.
what do you mean?
No, it said, there it is. In those days at that time, I will restore the fortunes. When you restore, that means that you have to have had it existing before. And there
Yeah.
was, the people of God had two things, they had people and they had land. But Jesus said that no longer was Jerusalem, no longer was there land involved. His land was now, it was now spiritual, so the only thing left to restore would have to be the people.
That's exactly right. It's all about people coming into the kingdom of God. That's all that matters now. That's right.